All right, thank you. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for coming to my flying ointment presentation. I do this every October. Sometimes I do it in May. I'm trying to make it like an annual thing, especially this time of year because October is associated with the Witches' Sabbath and Spirit Flight. Same thing with May 1st, Beltane. They're opposite each other on the wheel of the year. So they're kind of the high holy days of European witchcraft, neo-paganism, all of those things, whatever you want to call them. So I like to do it this time of year because this is generally when people would have been using flying ointments the most. And just to disclaimer, I say the word use a lot, and I don't mean it in an exploitative sort of a way. If I meant exploit, I would say exploit, so don't take it the wrong way if I say use. I mean it in a purely utilitarian and scientific fashion. I'm trying also to be very casual about this, even though it is a very in-depth and serious topic. My anxiety likes to turn me into a little bit of a crazy person before these things. Get rid of that. I'm hoping everybody can hear me. Thumbs up if you can. Because I'm unmuted and it said I was muted. Okay, cool. Perfect. Oh, so everyone should have their PDF files. I emailed them out, and then I also sent a link to the Google Drive for everybody. Google Drive is kind of weird. Turned on the permissions to make it so that anybody with the link can access the Google Drive. So if you don't get it in one place, you should have it in the other place. And you don't necessarily need them to even follow along with me or follow along with the course. It's a few different handouts that go a little bit more in depth on some of the topics that I will be talking about tonight. They're basically like all of my previous flying ointments, handouts, workshops, notes, articles. I do like some more in-depth scientific stuff with flying ointments and formulation for Patreon. So just a bunch of different things that I put together and gave you guys there. I did drop the link in the chat if you don't have it. Try to make this so you can at least see the table. I'm going to be back here, so if this is good for everyone, this is where I will be for the duration, the majority of the presentation. This is also the time of day where the neighborhood children like to be outside of my window and scream and do things that children do, so sorry about that. And we are recording, handouts are out. Cool. There will be time for questions at the end. If I mess something up or do something really bad, feel free to interrupt me. I'm happy to answer anybody's questions. If you have questions tonight or after the fact, feel free to shoot me an email. And if I don't know the answer to the question, I should be able to direct you to the place that you can find it. So the most important thing is that the information comes through, that you guys learn something. Sorry, someone's asking to be let back in via email. Cool. So the first part's going to kind of be history, background, some folklore on the flying ointments, things like that, and then we'll get into the really good part. That's generally when the wheels get turning and all the good information starts to come out. So my name is Kobe. I run the Poisoner's Apothecary. I specialize in the ritual use of psychoactive and poisonous plants. So that is my thing, that's what I do, that's my specialty. Just a little disclaimer on that. I'm not a clinical herbalist. So I'm not giving any kind of medical advice. I'm not a doctor. I'm just a witch that learned how to work with this stuff. So it kind of like bumps up against medicinal herbalism and psychedelic spirituality and traditional witchcraft and indigenous plant medicine. And I'm kind of in this weird like middle place between all of that. So flying ointments have been around for a very long time. They kind of reemerged in popularity. I'm gonna put a year number on it. I would say at least maybe, the past 10, 15 years or so, I'd say is when they really started to become popular again. And it seemed to kind of coincide with the popularity of traditional witchcraft, or what we would call European folk magic. So the medieval witchcraft, the archetypal image of the witch that we typically think of. When that started to come back around in the collective consciousness, we start seeing sort of more investigation into some of these things that people would have been doing during the time. And a lot of this has been lost. So it's kind of muddled with all of these church accounts, Inquisition accounts, and things like that, arguing back and forth about what these things actually were. And it's just really a lot of kind of like sifting through all of this stuff to really get to like the usable information, the true information on how these ointments were used and what was actually going on. They're very much connected to the idea of the witches' Sabbath. So being the nocturnal congregation of spirits, deities, dead that have passed on. This was a really common element in European folklore across Europe, mainly on mainland Europe, but it did kind of trickle up into the British Isles and things like that. But the wild hunt was a very well-known sort of a thing, this spiritual parade through the sky of all of these different entities that would happen at different times of year. So that was kind of the basis for the witch's flying ointment. If I move over here, I'm just checking, make sure everybody's okay. So the idea that all of these spirits were flying around, generally led by be the goddess Diana, or in some cases it might be Freya or Thor, or any of number of different pagan deities leading this spiritual procession. That was before it was really kind of looked at as evil or witchcraft, or really taking kind of this demonic sort of Christian spin on this folkloric idea that was very, very common. But then once we see sort of the Christian spin put on it and it becoming more of the devil's Sabbath, or this horde of demons flying through the night sky at the winter solstice or during the dark half of the year, it starts to have like a more sinister kind of an overlay over top of it. But at the root of it is really this sort of entheogenic or psychedelic spiritual tradition that was really, really commonplace throughout Europe. And to call it a tradition would be like even a misnomer, because it wasn't so much a cohesive tradition as, this specific group of people doing a specific type of thing. It was more so just common folkloric knowledge, that if you went out to the woods and ate these particular mushrooms, or if you took this medicinal salve that everybody was using and rubbed it on certain parts of your body, that certain things would happen. So it was just a very common knowledge sort of a thing. The same way that like a teenager, maybe not today, but when I was a teenager, we knew that we could go to Walgreens and get something called triple C's, which is a cough, whatever medicine that has a bunch of DXM in it, and you could take a bunch of it and trip, and it was a fun time. And we did that maybe more than once. But it's just sort of like common knowledge that people talk about. It's just a natural part of being human. And this was definitely the case in medieval Europe, pre-Christian Europe. So much information that just wants to come out like all at one time. So while they do have a place in medieval witchcraft and Europe, their origins go back a little bit farther than that. When we look prior to sort of the Inquisition and things like that, the flying ointments aren't so much flying ointments as they are just magical salves, different ritual preparations containing different magical ingredients that can be used for various different things. Going back, and I'm not going to go into a lot of details on like what the book was called or what year it was or who said it, because a lot of that detail information is in all the handouts. So I'm just going to kind of talk about the stuff generally, because it's just a lot to memorize and I don't have it memorized. But going way, way back, you see some of the first mentions of magical ointments in Greek mythology. We have Hera, who transformed, I think it was the goddess Arachne into a spider. We have Athena using some various different magical ointments. In Greek mythology, they were often used for like some type of transformation. We see like a similar element in the Odyssey with Circe transforming Odysseus's men into pigs through the use of a psychoactive pharmacon or magical ointments. So they weren't always just strictly for flight. So magical ointments have been a thing, I would say, for thousands of years, or as far back as we really have any kind of written history. There is some mention, I would say, I think as a Sumerian something or other, the shaman there would use a specific salve containing wolfsbane more for their shape-shifting rituals and things like that. But that's one really early mention that I can think of. So they were a thing. They were magical salves for specific purposes. Another origin to the witch's flying ointment, because we've got all of these different streams kind of like feeding into what the ointment is today and how we understand it today. So with Christian propaganda, trying to demonize or marginalize different groups of people and make them into scapegoats, make them look like the bad guy. And it's not just Christians, the Romans did it to the Jews. Everybody's kind of done it to everybody, where we have these different accusations of like, this group of people eats babies, or they bathe in the blood of their victims, or lots of cannibalism, infanticide, things that are just very, very extremely taboo, no matter who you talk to. These sorts of accusations would get leveled at various groups of people throughout history. And the flying ointment kind of became a tool for that. One of its earliest sort of manifestations was with the Cathars and the Waldensians and sort of the time period of like the Knights Templar. So very, very early Christianity, where there were these different sects that they all considered themselves Christian, but from everybody else's point of view, they were satanic because they're different from what we believe, and they worship the devil because they're not part of our group, sort of thing. So they used this idea of the heretics ointment to demonize these people. And the heretics ointment was something that was not even made with poisonous plants. That didn't come along until later. The heretics ointment was generally just a salve that was made from like the rendered fat of unbaptized children, where it would have blood in it. Something very kind of visceral, carnal like that. So it wasn't so much even a magical ointment as this idea of, these crazy heretics over here, they worship the devil, they eat babies, they make this just obnoxious ointment and rub it all over themselves and have these demonic orgies and things like that. So that became a tool that they were able to use, in addition to many other ones to kind of demonize these groups of people. And they're really good about, keeping their own history and keeping track of what's worked over the past, 2,000 to 3,000 years. So when the Inquisition kind of started to come, and this idea of like supernatural witchcraft became more of a thing. And now their focus is sort of not so much on these heretical Christian sects, because that's sort of been wiped out and the Catholic Church owns everything. So now our focus is going to be on women, other marginalized people, village people, village healers and things like that. So really it comes from a combination of fear of women, fear of knowledge, fear of plants, mushrooms. I call it phytophobia or mycophobia. Where these people didn't believe in anything that wasn't, pray it away sort of thing. So they were kind of wrapping all of that up in the idea of witchcraft. So they're able to get rid of a whole bunch of people that were a threat to them through those accusations. And the flying ointment was a really easy tool for people to use to be able to do that, because it was such a commonly used preparation. So on the medicinal side of it, healing salves were very, very commonplace, like I mentioned. So it was a really easy way to preserve the plant material, to preserve the medicinal constituents, to transport it, on different things like that. So it just made sense, that people made these things. The fact that they were so common made it really, really easy for the inquisitors and the people that were, hunting these people down and trying to find evidence of witchcraft. Made it really easy for them to essentially just go to like the equivalent of their medicine cabinet and pull out a bottle of aspirin and be like, oh, here it is. This is the devil's aspirin. This person's definitely a witch. And because it was common knowledge that these ointments did contain poisonous or psychoactive plant material, that it was kind of easy to sort of make that association. So a bunch of different things that kind of wrap up into like what our idea of the flying ointments actually are. There's a lot of misinformation. There's even a lot of misinformation today, over the past 10, 15 years about, we have this idea and sort of like this romanticized story of what these things do and what they're capable of. And we're painted all of this imagery of the witch's Sabbath and just sort of like this grand witchy climax that we all want to get to. And we're like handed this key that's supposed to be able to allow us to do that. And as well-meaning as folks are, it's generally a little bit of a letdown. And it's not what people are expecting. And there's a few different reasons for that. One of them being misinformation. Yeah. Talk about that. So everything that we have, essentially, all of the information that's been sort of carried down and recorded, at least from European origins, has been in the context of the witch trials. So we don't have any really surviving information from people that would have identified as practitioners, or even just regular people that would have been using these preparations for spiritual purposes. All of the written record comes from either physicians that were arguing kind of in defense of the accused, saying that no, it wasn't the devil, it's not this superstitious stuff, it's because it has these poisonous psychoactive plants in it, or different things like that, trying to take a more naturalistic sort of stance on the flying ointments. And then on the other hand, we've got all of this debate between various individuals within the church, trying to decide, is it solely by the power of the devil himself that these ointments are able to work, or is it because of these, terrible, terrible evil plants and things like that? So just a lot of bouncing back and forth between these people, and all of the recipes, all of the accounts of any kind of experimentation that has been done have been done by people that were scientists, or kind of these learned men that were experimenting and investigating. Even going back into like the 1500s, it was essentially like this guy that was testing out one of the medicinal ointments on, I think it was the wife of one of his patients, or whoever this man was to him, but he put the ointment all over the wife. I don't know if she did it herself or if he did it for her. But the reason that she even came in the first place is because she was having a hard time sleeping. She was all stressed out because her husband was cheating on her. Go figure. So the idea was that this ointment was supposed to help her. And funnily enough, like it actually did. The account goes that he applies the ointment. She pretty much immediately or soon after falls into a sleep that lasts for around 30 hours. When she awakens, she is, kind of like happy, in a good mood, giggling, laughing, whatever. And then when we get the account of what she experienced, she talks about flying and going to another city and going to this awesome party. And then she has sex with this attractive young man that she's just all about. And to her, like, she literally went and did these things. And for her, that was enough to be okay and feel like she kind of paid the husband back. So that's just one example of an account, but again, it wasn't anyone that was using it for the purpose of witchcraft or even within a spiritual context. So a lot of that is just sort of coming through secondhand. But we can look at other cultures, other traditions where sort of the entheogenic use of plants, psychoactive plants has been maintained and carried on, to kind of get some different ideas for how we can actually work with these ointments and apply them for things beyond spirit flight, because it is not the only thing that they're capable of. That's kind of their biggest reputation or their biggest claim to fame, because they are called flying ointments, but they're also called Ungüentum Lamiarum, which is witch's ointment, Ungüentum Diaboli, devil's ointment, and this isn't a flying ointment, but the Ungüentum Papulion. That was kind of the earliest precursor to any kind of a medicinal psychoactive ointment that was recorded. And that was in an 11th century medicinal codex called the Trotula. I believe I talk more about that in the handout, and I also wrote about it in this book that I wrote. Yes, so we have actual experimentations up until the mid 1500s of different individuals experimenting with these ointments. But kind of after that, we sort of lose any mention of the psychoactive components in the ointment itself, and everything just kind of gets thrown to flights of fancy and stories about the devil and things like that. Part of the reason that we see kind of this gap in information or in people talking about the psychoactive components is to sort of distance the religious practice, distance the spiritual practice from the drug culture of the 60s and 70s. So in a lot of the books that were written around that time, they don't mention much of the use of the psychoactive plants. And even interestingly, like in some of the investigation that I've been doing, I'm just thinking about like the Wiccan revival, the neo-pagan revival, and Gerald Gardner and Alex Sanders and Robert Cochrane and things like that. It just kind of made me wonder, if they were really that tapped into this folkloric tradition or this kind of unbroken chain of wisdom, that I found it just kind of funny that nobody really mentions anything about psychoactive substances, plant medicine, altered states of consciousness, or anything like that beyond, what can be achieved with, other ritual practices. And it was Gerald Gardner that was very much kind of opposed to the use of psychedelics. And part of that was just sort of the climate of the times. It was the 1960s, so a lot of, just sort of bad vibes around like the hippies and LSD and drug culture. And here we have this new baby religion that is trying to, be accepted and become mainstream and not, be demonized and accused of worshiping the devil and doing all of these crazy things. So in an effort to make it a little bit more palatable to the masses, Gardner really kind of suppressed any kind of entheogenic plant medicine in witchcraft. So he is partially responsible for stamping that out. And a lot of it's just kind of lost. So it's not out there, for the general public. Robert Cochrane was a little bit different. He was kind of from the opposite end of the camp. He was very much interested in the use of various psychoactive substances, including belladonna, which is what he died from in combination to some other pharmaceutical medication. Another one would have been Rosaline Norton. She was a practitioner in Australia, I want to say in the 50s or 60s, very much tapped into the use of psychoactive substances in a ritual context. Aleister Crowley is another one, Austin Osman Spare. So it's definitely there. It's just sort of been wrung out of modern witchcraft until relatively recently, which you can find a whole lot of recipes for psychoactive incense and extraction of DMT and doing all of these crazy things in ritual magic. So like Della Porta or the Picatrix or all of these older grimoires tend to have a lot of these psychoactive recipes that have been expunged or taken away from us. So the stuff is out there. These people have access to all of these primary sources when Wicca was becoming a thing. So it's just a matter of witches finding and recovering the information and kind of repurposing it to fit their own practice. That goes for flying ointments, cannabis, psychedelic mushrooms, all of the poisonous plants, all of the entheogens. We're sort of in this renaissance right now of like reinvestigating and relearning how to essentially start from the beginning and relearn our relationship with these plants and how they interact with our bodies, the different effects that they have on our perception. And then also, of course, looking at the spiritual effects, the spiritual changes and enhancements and things like that that can happen when we work with these. So just real quick, some different things that we can use flying ointments for beyond flying. Excuse me. Yes, shamanic journeying, astral projection, spirit flight, going to the witch's sabbat, all of those out-of-body experience type things are within the realm of what can be achieved with the flying ointment, but also kind of getting out of that frame of mind in that they're not just for that, but looking at the specific plants, the different ingredients that are brought together, and their own individual correspondences, as well as just the correspondences of poisonous plants in general. because while they do all have like their own individual little niche in the magical world, poisonous plants as a whole are very much connected to the archetypal witch. Working with poisonous plants is a very transgressive thing. So transgression being anything that is against a cultural taboo or personal taboo. Other examples would be things like reading the Lord's Prayer backwards, or spitting on a cross, or maybe engaging in like some really kinky sexual behavior, different things like that. Anything that sort of brings up that fear or that resistance, whether it is something that's been programmed into us or something that we've just naturally acquired being human. Those things are very powerful and cathartic sort of initiatory experiences or kind of thresholds that we can cross. And working with flying ointments and the poison path in general, it is a very transgressive thing. It will bring you face to face with a lot of these cultural taboos, a lot of things that are associated with sex and death and trauma and grief and fear and anger and just like all of the bad, nasty stuff that we can experience as humans. But it's not meant to be bad. It's not meant to be painful. It's just sort of a revisiting or reorienting yourself around those emotions and those experiences, and learning how to process them a little bit differently. And that's kind of gets more into the poison path as a philosophy, in learning how to recognize your own personal toxins, whether they're environmental toxins or mental, emotional things, different things like that, and just kind of transmuting them into something else or repurposing them into something that we can draw power from. So beyond that, all of the plant allies that are put into flying ointments could all be considered master plant spirits. So they're very, very important teachers. Belladonna, henbane, mandrake, datura, we could say wolfsbane, foxglove, all of like the really big name poisonous plants are master plant spirits. We'll generally see this with a lot of low dose herbs or plants that have a very high potency, that they are considered master plant spirits. Looking at indigenous cultures and Amazonian plant spirit medicine, these people work with plants that people of European descent would consider poisonous. They work with them on a very regular basis. And it's interesting because the way that that's communicated is generally not even in the context of the plant being poisonous. The plant is powerful, the plant is medicinal, the plant has a very strong spirit, but there's not a lot of this fear-based, that's poisonous, that's toxic, that's useless. Like everything has a use, everything has a purpose. So what I'm getting at, these are master plant spirits, so they can help us to connect with other spirits, whether it's the ancestors, spirits associated with witchcraft in general, or more of a green-based practice, and connect that way. Also connecting with other plant spirits and familiar spirits in general. So that's generally part of a journey or a kind of a spirit flight when we go out and try and interact with different spirits to see who wants to hang out with us and keep working with us. So the flying ointments, the poisonous plants, can act as intermediaries to bring in other spiritual entities, energies, things like that they may be associated with. So all of them have their own correspondences, associations to planets, elements, and even deities and spirits that we can kind of get into. Some of these are more traditional associations, and others are kind of more drawn from different qualities of the plants, whether it's a medicinal quality or, for example, belladonna being very much connected to Lilith. So this powerful, ferocious, monstrous female archetype, female spirit, very dominant, very unsubmitting, martial even. So associated with Mars, even though it has that Saturnian element to it. This association isn't really traditional or really found in a book that's more than 20 years old, but it's definitely it's a synergy. It's an affinity that the belladonna plant spirit has with this other infernal or goetic, or however you want to position Lilith. So we can kind of draw connections to other spirits that we want to work with, just looking at some of these different correspondences. Another example, before I get too off track, is henbane. So when we talk about henbane, typically it's always in the context of necromancy and death and communicating with the dead. And it's one of the best herbs for that. However, it also has associations to the sky gods. So specifically deities like Jupiter, Thor, an obscure Celtic deity called Bel or Belanos, who is like a sun god. So it's got sort of this Jovian or Jupiterian aspect to it too, which is not necessarily in line with its darker, more Saturnian associations. But that's kind of like peeling back the layer of this onion. A lot of the dark Saturnian malefic associations come from a little bit later. The writings of Culpeper, or all of the medieval propaganda against poisonous plants that we have coming from Hildegard von Bingen and Gerard and all of these people that told everyone to rip them out, essentially. They're the ones that really gave them the malefic and Saturnian association. But if we look back a little bit further, henbane being used in beer brewing and sort of these more celebratory rituals. It does have aphrodisiac effects and has been used both internally and externally as an aphrodisiac. So there's that other element there. So they're not necessarily all going to be about death and darkness and uncomfortable emotions and things like that. They do have sort of a more Venusian side to them too. And since I'm talking about different ways that we can work with flying ointments, and I just mentioned Venus, flying ointments can also be incorporated into sex magic practices. They're really just aphrodisiacs in general. So this could be part of like an ecstatic ritual to get yourself worked up into, sort of this sexual state or this really highly energized state, whether it's to raise energy for a specific purpose, or if you're, practicing self-magic as a means of healing from trauma, practicing self-care, those sorts of things. Working with aphrodisiac herbs in that way is super helpful. So the flying ointments can be used in that way as well, sort of as an erotic massage oil. So this can be something that's done by yourself or with a partner. So you're actually ritualizing like the application and the massaging and intimacy of putting the ointment itself on. And then it's also got the aphrodisiac properties. It's going to act as a muscle relaxer, kind of lowering inhibitions on things like that could be a desired state of consciousness for various different rituals. One note on that is a massage salve, not a lubricant. So yes, it can be used in sex magic, tantric rituals, yoga, things like that. We just want to be careful. It's not a lubricant. We're not actually using it to penetrate anything anywhere. And that's one thing to remember with these, that they're not meant to go in your mouth or in any other body orifices. And the reason for that is just simply because the absorption is so increased in those areas that it's just not safe to tell people to do that. But the absorption is much higher in those areas. And that's all I have to say. There are a few that are a little bit safer to use as sort of an erotic massage oil or intimate massage oil, if you want to call it that. And those would be henbane and mandrake. Henbane and mandrake are a little bit more gentle when used topically. They've both been infused into honey, wine, beer, things that have actually been ingested. So there is some more recent information that's been floating around out there about which poisonous plants not to ingest and which ones you can and which ones you can't put on mucous membranes and which ones that are okay and different things. And I've just sort of decided to like skip all of that because that's all just coming from other people like me, and look at like the actual historical precedent and any existing medicinal formulas, different medicinal preparations where people were actually slapping this on their skin or ingesting it or using it as an inhaler. Then we can safely say that if we use them similarly today, we're going to be okay. So kind of looking at the ways that people have used them medicinally in the past, because like henbane, belladonna, datura, it's been used in the pharmaceutical industry, and even over here in the US up until like the early 1900s. There's photographs of, I think it's like the Eli Lilly company on their belladonna farm, growing it for the scopolamine and the atropine. Same thing with datura. Datura was one that was grown over here during World War II for a while. Because we couldn't get our belladonna from Bulgaria, which is where it typically comes from. Yeah, so it's definitely being used in pharmaceutical medication up until very recently. We're talking about the actual plant preparations, so things like belladonna plasters, which were topical applications, tinctures being used internally for different GI issues and things like that. And then also the belladonna cigarettes, datura cigarettes, the Asthmador, which were used for the treatment of asthma. Okay, so we're not talking about smoking. I'm going to read this little quote real quick and then kind of start to segue into the next part. Modern flying ointments are much different from their medieval counterparts, using different carrier oils, different techniques, and plants grown in new parts of the world. With what we have learned about science and spirituality in the past 600 years has shown us that it is a synergy of phytochemistry and plant spirit gnosis that creates these experiences. Flying ointments are meant to enhance your practice. They are not the secret key. There are infinite other ways of accessing altered states of consciousness that don't require herbs at all. However, there is something very magical about the union of human and plant in ritual space that can only be experienced. Flying ointments are one of many tools that we as magical practitioners have access to. That being said, flying ointments, when made properly, will alter your state of consciousness. Sometimes their medicine is subtle, other times it is dramatic, but plants communicate in very different ways than people. This could mean helping you relax, opening access to intuition, seeing form in abstract shapes and light, feeling other presences, shifts in energy, sensations of movement, etc. Many of these qualities add to certain ritual practices and can be intensified using different trance-inducing techniques. So that is important because all of the other ritual elements that you are incorporating are just as important as the flying ointment itself. So yes, there is, an actual chemical thing that is happening. Yes, the plants are very chemically potent, but they're also very spiritually potent. And when we start to incorporate these different layers of this transgressive, taboo breaking technique to working with plants that we're maybe not necessarily comfortable with, or plants that have been for so many years associated with exactly what we do and what we're doing. Completely lose my train of thought. That, yeah. Does anybody have any questions right now before I get into kind of the practical side? And once my hands start doing things, then a whole bunch more of information will probably come out. That's the best. I don't normally go into like a lot of detail on the specific plants, as far as, this is belladonna. It contains atropine and scopolamine and the different alkaloids and things like that. That should all be in your printed material, and hoping you guys are already, maybe a little bit familiar with that. That's interesting to know from like a chemistry standpoint, but it's not necessarily, super necessary. Like the thing with tropane alkaloids is there are a few different ones, but they all pretty much behave really similarly. The main differences are going to occur depending on how they're being consumed. So topical application is going to be like the safest and the fastest, or the safest and the slowest. Yes, I will talk about carrier oils in just a moment. Yeah, so there are a lot of different factors that we can get pretty, in-depth and scientific with, but across the board, the alkaloids do like relatively the same thing. So I've got belladonna, henbane, datura, all three of them here. I don't typically do a lot with mandrake, just because it's super hard to grow and you don't get a lot out of it, and I just don't. I feel like my work is mostly with belladonna and henbane, maybe a little sprinkling of like magic mushrooms, but those are pretty much the core ones that I really work with, personally, and like on a really like deeper level, I guess. Those are the ones that I'm most called to. So how the hell do you make these things? The first thing that we do is create an infused oil. So just a regular herbal infusion here. Somebody asked about using olive oil versus other carrier oils. And that's kind of like one of the most useful pieces of information that I have to give you guys, is like the carrier oils that you're using can and do make a difference when it comes to extracting the medicinal components of the plant material, and then also in absorption. So medieval flying ointments were super different because they didn't have extra virgin olive oil. Well, send me some of your mandrakes, Billy. They didn't have extra virgin olive oil. Essentially, all it would have been like a really raw, unprocessed olive oil. So that's one thing. And then they would have had a number of different animal lards available. The thing with animal lard, and vegans aren't going to like this, animal lard works the best. It absorbs the fastest. It absorbs the most completely. It doesn't leave behind any residue, which you will see with any of the wax-based flying ointments, that they will leave behind some kind of residue, even into the next day. But with pork lard, because it has a really high fatty acid content, yes, like pork lard. Pork lard is kind of like the most common, the most go-to. Pigs also have a lot of DNA in common with humans. Sarah Lawless is, I think, she's the one that told me or educated me about this. So it's really, really easy for our bodies to absorb pork lard because of that. But also just simply because we're animals and they're animals, and it just absorbs. But it is because of the fatty acid content that we're able to get a better extraction as well. And the same is going to be true for any unprocessed olive oil. So the extra virgin olive oil has been refined. We wouldn't necessarily want that for a flying ointment. If we're really, really trying to, do everything we can to make this as powerful and as concentrated and as effective as possible. The unprocessed olive oil, I think you could probably get it from like Italian markets or things. There's extra virgin, virgin, and then whatever's before that is supposed to have a really high fatty acid content. And also would be sort of like the more traditional recipe. If you're wanting to do, like a classic medieval medicinal ointment, it's either going to be animal lard or unprocessed olive oil. We also have the option to use goose lard, bear. When we get into incorporating other animal spirit allies, we can look at bears as being very connected to healing through sleep and dreams. So dream magic, dream incubation, that's because they hibernate. Looking at geese, geese are a very European wild hunt kind of an animal. So very much connected to like spirit flight and that sort of thing. I'm over here because I'm going to type something in the box. It's like there is a place that I get that from. And it's got like the easiest, most self-explanatory name. Fatworks. Fatworks Foods. And that's where you can get all of your different animal lards. So you could do a salve like just with the animal lard by itself, and you don't need to add any wax because it is going to be solid at room temperature. But if you live in Florida or somewhere that's hot, you might want to add a little bit of wax to it to make it a little bit thicker. But like in reality, like these ointments don't have to be super thick. Like you could make a flying oil that does essentially the same thing as the ointment. They're just a little bit easier to keep contained, I guess, would be the main benefit to that. Jojoba oil is supposed to be really good for absorbing into the skin, but I don't use that. It is pretty expensive and doesn't really seem to make like a huge difference with the other things that I do. One that I did discover that extracts really well is coconut oil. So coconut oil is also going to be solid at room temperature. Coconut oil it technically behaves like a little bit more like alcohol. It has like a little bit more alkalinity. And I should have done my spiel about the pH scale before I started talking about this. but coconut oil has a little bit more alkalinity. And I do air quotes because oil doesn't technically have a pH because there's no water in it. So I'm going to rewind really quick. The pH scale is a scale from 0 to 14 that measures how acidic or how alkaline something is. So all the way down to 0 is going to be more acidic. So think things like lemon juice, apple cider vinegar, our skin, our hair. That's all going to be more on the acidic side. Right in the middle at 7 is neutral. So this would be like distilled water. It doesn't really have one or the other, it's balanced. And then as we get up into the higher end, things that are alkaline. This like sends me back to when I was a cosmetology instructor because I used to teach color theory and chemistry and talk about the pH scale. So I can't think of any foods that are alkaline, but as we get higher in the pH scale, we get to things like permanent hair color or bleach or other like chemical texture service, things like that, higher up into the pH scale. We could consider alcohol is going to be a little bit more towards the alkaline side, even though it is kind of slightly neutral. The only reason that any of this matters is that tropane alkaloids are known for extracting more readily, so easier, in an acidic environment. So tropane alkaloids extract more easily in an acidic environment. And this is definitely true. This is going to be true for all alkaloids. So alkaloids are the active compounds in the plant that make it poisonous, medicinal, psychoactive. Alkaloids being things like caffeine, nicotine, tropane alkaloids, cocaine, morphine, anything that makes you feel good essentially is going to have some type of an alkaloid origin. So our bodies are going to absorb those more easily when we have incorporated an acid into that ecosystem. So like down here in Florida, kratom is really, really popular. It's a green leaf that they make a tea out of, and they always put like lemon juice or cinnamon or something else in it. And what that does is it helps to pull the parts that you want out of the plant material, and then it makes it easier for your digestive system to absorb it. Which doesn't matter as much when we're talking about like making flying ointments because we're not going to be eating them. But from an extraction standpoint, we're able to kind of compensate for some of the drawbacks when it comes to trying to extract these things into oil. So tropane alkaloids extract more easily in an acidic environment. The other thing that you'll hear over and over and over and over again is that tropane alkaloids are not oil soluble. And that's true to an extent. The reason that is like repeated so often is because like we're trying to literally extract tropane alkaloids into oil. So it should technically be impossible, but it's not. The same thing is true with amanita mushrooms, cannabis, even if we want to use cannabis as an example. Typically when we are making any kind of an edible preparation or topical preparation incorporating cannabis, we need to either decarb it first, so put it in the oven on a low temperature for a little while to start breaking down some of those carbon molecules, or extracting it into the oil, which makes it so like our bodies can absorb it or that the actual constituents get to where they're supposed to be. So saying that tropane alkaloids are not soluble in oil is kind of like a half-truth. When you read that, or when you read anything about tropane alkaloids, it's generally from some type of an academic journal or pharmaceutical article, something like that. And they're generally talking about the pure isolated alkaloids. So they're talking about just the atropine and the scopolamine and the hyoscyamine after it's been pulled out. That part is not oil soluble. So what you have left after you do an extract with alcohol, with an alkaloid containing plant, is this really sticky, resiny stuff. And you really can't do anything with it unless you go like a whole nother level and do like another chemical process, which is really close to like making cocaine or meth or something like that. So you don't need to extract like pure alkaloids from any of these plants because it's really dangerous. But from an experimental standpoint, I did that. So I made a tincture and I evaporated all of the alcohol out of the tincture to leave behind essentially the tropane alkaloids, whatever different resins are in the plant or just some of the more crude components, and you're really left with like this sticky tar-like material that unless you redissolve it in some other kind of a solvent, you really can't do anything with it. So it is that part that's not oil soluble. But when we're working with this actual plant material that's got tropane alkaloids, but it's also got 10,000 other different compounds in it, things behave a little bit differently. So we are creating an infused oil. It is not an extract. So when we look at it, microscopically, like yes, the medicinal compounds have been extracted from the plant material, but really what we've done is just created a suspension, which is all of these tiny little particles that are just floating around in the oil. So it is a little bit harder to get tropane alkaloids into oil, but it is not impossible. And that's where the importance of the pH scale comes in, and adding additional ingredients to your flying ointments. I typically use grapeseed oil for all of my formulas. That is what I started with, and that's what I've stuck with. The reason that I use the grapeseed oil is because it has a really, really high smoke point or burn point. So it says it's for high heat cooking. This is important for if you're doing like a stovetop infusion, where you've got like a mason jar sitting in a pan full of water, and you're doing your infusion that way. Grapeseed oil is better because it's not going to explode everywhere and coat your entire kitchen like coconut oil will. So I did mention that coconut oil is good at extracting. I learned that because coconut oil is what the magic butter machine suggested that I use to make can of butter. So I kind of looked into that a little bit more and found out the reason for the enhanced absorption and extraction with coconut butter is because it does behave a little bit more like an alkali. Coconut oil has a really, really low burn point or smoke point or whatever you want to call it. So you can heat it up. The water is not boiling, but the coconut oil is flying everywhere. So you want to be careful with that. That's why I use the grapeseed oil. If you were to do coconut oil, I would do it in like a slow cooker or inside the magic butter machine, which is like self-contained. I'll talk about the magic butter machine for a little bit because that's what I use to make all of my formulas now. Just because it's faster, I could make a liter of infused oil in 2 hours. I can make a tincture in 4 hours. So it's just a lot faster. And I think with the addition of the heat and then also like that the spinning, the movement, whipping everything around like that, you get a really, really good infusion. Here she is. I feel like I'm doing an infomercial. Everyone's getting one. So got all your little heat settings. If you're doing like medicinal herbalism, medicinal preparations, or even like ritual stuff like this is just such a lifesaver. I used to do all of my ointments in like 250 milliliter batches, and I'd get like 8 little tins out of it. And that became unsustainable really fast. So that's been super helpful. What else do I want to say about that? So if you don't have a magic butter machine, there are 2 different ways that you can infuse your oils. You always have to use heat with tropane alkaloids. Like it's just not going to do anything if you have it sit in a dark room. And nightshades do not like the sun. Sunlight will degrade tropane alkaloids very quickly. So once the plant material has been dried, keep it in the dark. So for infusing the oils, you could do a saucepan, filled 1/2 to 3/4 of the way with water. And then you just take your other vessel full of plant material and that gets set in the water. This is called a double boiler. It's also called a bain marie. It was named after a female alchemist. One of like our earliest recorded alchemists was a woman, a Jewish woman. So she invented the idea of taking a container full of one thing, putting it in a hot water bath to heat it, but not overheat it. So that's what you want to do if you're doing stovetop. Do the double boiler. Put it on like medium. I do a little bit higher at first to get things warmed up, and then I turn it down just to like let it simmer. The longer you go, the better. Normally do like 4 to 6 hours. You're going to want to watch it and make sure that you keep adding water to the outside. So water doesn't go in the thing with plant material in it. I think everybody knows how to do this, but if not, I'll explain if you guys have questions. That's not super like functional over time or whatever, but you could do a slow cooker. So if you're doing a slow cooker, you literally just put everything in the slow cooker. But make sure you're using a slow cooker that is reserved just for poisonous plants. That way you can put everything in there, put it on medium, and let it sit for 8 hours or 12 hours or 2 days or however long you would like it to infuse for. So it's generally going to stop somewhere. Like it's only going to get so much plant material out. And once it gets there, you could leave it on there for a century and it's not going to get any stronger. So don't be afraid of like, oh, I left this on for way too long. It's going to be too dangerous. Doesn't work like that. So, because they're not super oil soluble, there's a few different things that you can do. You don't have to do all of these things. You could do a combination of them. It's totally up to you. I kind of switch it up. Sometimes I'll do one thing, sometimes I'll do a combination. It really just depends. Sorry. One of the most helpful things that you can do is called comminution, or basically just grinding everything up. So that's 1/2 ounce of henbane. And it's just like a green. It looks like oregano. That's the consistency. when you increase the surface area, or when you grind something up, you're increasing the surface area. And when you do that, it's able to extract from many more points than it would be if it was like whole plant material. So like this right here, it's belladonna. We've got like some bigger stems in there and some whole berries and stuff like that. Like it'll still work. It's not going to be less than. It just doesn't come pre-ground up like the henbane does. Yeah, it still works. So one thing that you can do is, okay, wait, slow the fuck down. All of my infused oils and all of my flying ointment formulas are made with pretty much the same formulation. I've tried to kind of standardize everything just to give people like a starting point. I haven't used the Levo 2. I'm going to talk about sodium hydroxide in a little bit, if I remember. It's like my ADD is horrible. It's so embarrassing. Okay, so you can do this with any medicinal salve to increase its potency. Like I was saying before I got distracted, all of my formulas are the same. They're all a 1 to 10. So that's 1 gram of plant material for every 10 milliliters of oil. That's a pretty standard therapeutic dose. Sometimes you'll see that go up to like a 1 to 20, but that's more so for like tinctures, things that are taken internally. Though you can apply tinctures topically. That is an option. So 1 to 10 is kind of the safe space. That's the zone where I can teach people how to make the stuff. I can sell to whoever and be able to go to sleep at night and not worry about anybody poisoning themselves or anything like that. But those are therapeutic dosages. So you are getting medicinal benefits from all of these formulations. I try not to talk a lot about the medicinal effects or make like medicinal claims, but like these are medicinal herbs, so they are going to all have the medicinal properties that they would normally have. And if you're getting a medicinal effect, if you're getting a therapeutic dose, you are getting an entheogenic dose. You know, the plant spirit, the energy, all of that is there. We don't always have to go, you know, to the complete other end of the spectrum. I think a lot of times people kind of compare working with flying ointments to like an acid trip or taking mushrooms or something like that. And while it can definitely become that, it's usually more when you're ingesting these things orally through tinctures or smoking or incense that you really get like what I would describe as a trip. A topical application. Even looking at the medieval accounts, you know, when people would put the ointment on their entire body, the only thing that happens is they pass out and fall asleep for a long period of time, and they have really crazy dreams. So that is kind of the nature of the nightshades and of tropane alkaloids. A lot of what they do and what they're capable of happens when we sleep, when we dream. It happens subconsciously. You know, they're very much connected to like our perception and our sight, our physical sight and our spiritual sight, having an effect on the pineal gland, which is the structure in our brains that helps like regulate our sleep cycles and different things like that, and is supposed to be connected to psychic ability. And it's basically like a vestigial internal eyeball. So it's just in there. inside our skull, inside our brain, but it knows whether it's light or dark or whether the sun's up or down. So the nightshades are very much connected to like that balancing of light and darkness and our perception or how we perceive light and darkness. And so like what I'm getting at is that the visions, the spiritual visitations and things, like they're not going to be full on hallucinations. Even ingesting these plants, it's just not going to be like that. The nightshades really play on like shadows, different varying levels of light and things like that. So you almost kind of have to trick yourself into kind of getting these things to happen. Where am I? So for the 1 to 10, 1 gram plant material to 10 milliliters of oil. What ointment am I even making? I didn't even. You guys just want me to mix them all together. Great. So I do have my devil's ointment, which is got datura, henbane, and belladonna in it. We'll just make something fun and see what happens. We'll do a few different things. One technique is called the alcohol intermediary method. Alcohol extracts way better than oil. That's because it's water-based. Water will extract really easily too, but we can't do that. So the alcohol intermediary method kind of gets the process started. It starts to break down that outer cell wall that all plants have, which is like a harder coating. To kind of start pulling out those medicinal components. So for that, you essentially take your plant material. So if you're doing, I normally work in just 250 milliliter batches. It's still a 1 to 10. So I would use 25 grams of plant material to 250 milliliters of oil. And I do the metric system because it's easier. But it equals out to be about like an ounce in a cup, I think. Don't quote me on that. Use metric. So for this, you're essentially just wetting it with alcohol. This could be vodka or Everclear. Everclear is going to work better, and it's also going to evaporate faster. So we don't want the alcohol to stay in there. Otherwise, it would be a liniment, not a salve. Liniments are totally options for working with nightshades. Basically, it's like an infused oil and a tincture mixed together. It gives you a liniment. And that's kind of what's happening here. So the alcohol helps to extract the plant material. The amount that I use is really just like enough to wet it. That was vodka. I think I diluted that a little bit. Another option is rubbing alcohol. That works too. So it's maybe like a shot glass or half of a shot glass. It's just enough to little pour just to wet everything down. Stir it up so it all gets coated. And that's going to start pulling all of those alkaloids out for us. So I was rubbing alcohol. That's going to evaporate really, really quickly too, which is great. The vodka takes a little bit longer, but like it's not a huge issue. It makes the ointments smell a little bit different. They're not going bad, they just have a different smell. Alcohol intermediary method, we can do with Everclear, vodka, rubbing alcohol, and then you literally just add your oil on top of that. So if you're doing this on the double boiler, this pan has water in it already. So you're just taking your glass container, hopefully it doesn't blow up, and you're just sitting it in the water. Oh, I turned on the wrong burner and melted my I knew this would either be really cool or it would be a complete disaster. I never use that burner, ever. You can laugh, it's fine, it's hilarious. I'm a mess, I know. Okay. So if we want to one up from that, using what we know about acids extracting the alkaloids a little bit easier, we can then take our alcohol before we pour it onto the plant material, and we can add don't really want to do lemon juice or apple cider vinegar, just because of like the water content, like there's a chance that it could go off. But like, I think that's sort of like a little bit of like well-meaning over precaution too. You know, if we're like heating the alcohol out of that, like why can we not heat the water out of the lemon or heat the water out of the apple cider vinegar? So I would say that it would probably work too. But essentially we're adding an acid to the alcohol. This, what I'm sprinkling in here is citric acid. So you just get that in like the canning aisle for food preservation. It's really, really sour. And you just sprinkle some of that in. So what that's going to do is acidify the alcohol. So now we're getting the extractability of the alcohol and then the added benefit of the acid. And that would just get poured on top of the plant material, just like we did before. Yeah, and I normally will dissolve the citric acid in the alcohol first, just because like if you sprinkle it in there and then pour it on there and it doesn't all get coated, like the little granules still kind of stay granules. So I think pretty much the same across the board. It's used for canning tomatoes, which are also nightshades. Okay, we did that. Intermediary, that's done. Okay, so the acids will help to extract. Another thing that we can do, instead of just using regular alcohol for the alcohol intermediary method, you could use a tincture. So if you have like a tincture of datura or a tincture of fill in the blank, whatever plant you're wanting to incorporate, using that as the alcohol to add that additional concentration to it. That's an option that's going to work the same way as the alcohol intermediary method. You can also do this technique is a little bit more dangerous just because you are having to use a larger amount of alcohol and then also heat it for longer. And when you're heating like alcohol and oil at the same time, things like that can happen and it can be dangerous. So just please be careful. But what you can do essentially is take a tincture, say like it's a 1 to 10 tincture, and do like 10 milliliters of it. So, you know, there's going to be 1 gram in that 10 milliliters. So for every 10 milliliters of tincture that you add to your oil infusion, you're getting 1 gram of whatever plant material is in there. So you could do that. You know, if you have belladonna infusion and you want to make it, you know, double it up with datura, and just take your datura tincture and add it to the belladonna infused oil, and then all of that would get put on heat on the stove. You'd want to heat it to a little bit higher of a temperature, not to where it's like boiling or bubbling, but it's something that you could leave for a few hours, and you're essentially going to see this bubble of alcohol kind of floating around on the top in the middle, and that's going to gradually get smaller and smaller and smaller, and once it's pretty much disappeared, that's when you know all of the alcohol is gone and it leaves behind all of the plant material. So the plant material stays in the alcohol, and now you've just got a more concentrated oil infusion. So you can do it that way to kind of make things more concentrated. You can also do like a double infusion. So sometimes, especially with like the larger pieces of plant material, it's hard to like really cram everything in there to get it to be like a 1 to 5 or a 1 to 3. So if you do a 1 to 10 infusion and strain everything out, and then add that same amount of new plant material back to it and infuse it again, you're kind of making it more concentrated in 2 separate steps. Because you do have to get it like really finely powdered to get to some of those more concentrated mixing ratios. You want to do this? A lot of this stuff is just like stuff that I've figured out along the way. Kind of at like a weird intersection point. Like I'm not an organic chemist or anything like near that. But I learned some things in cosmetology school, and I'm just a little bit of a science nerd, and so I've kind of done like this reverse engineering and investigating, and like that to me is like my like that's my path, that's my practice, that's what really, really just does it for me, is investigating like how to really tweak and kind of create with these plants, because there are so many like options, so many unexplored options, and like, to be perfectly honest, most people, most herbalists even haven't even given these plants like a second look in the past 200 years. There's so much potential for like pain relief, anxiety relief, even some cases where like belladonna and henbane were used to help with alcohol withdrawal and opiate overdose and addiction, and just all of these things that are so like prevalent right now, and then things that are also very like important and near to me. It's just like I'm finding out that like these poisonous witchy plants that I loved just because they were poisonous and dark and witchy are also like the keys to like solving some of the biggest like problems and issues and things that like I've dealt with in my own life, and kind of like the real like core reason to like why I do all of this in the first place, is not to be magical or special or anything. It's just fucking help people, and that's it. That's just all. I never tell all my secrets either. So, you know, part of this is like magical synergy. Part of this is, you know, spiritual forces. I feel like every day when I'm working with these plants and going through these motions, you know, there's just like a constant narrative going through my head, and like, you know, what does this mean? What is this going to be used for? What are the implications of that? What are you doing? Who do you think you are? Just all of this constant back and forth in my mind. And I'm just like working out all of these problems and doing all of this growth, and I don't know, like actually changing, which we never thought that was going to happen. Just through like the proximity to working with these plants and helping other people incorporate them into their spiritual practice. And they've just kind of taken me on a journey that I really didn't expect that I would be going on. But here we are. Okay. I'm gonna do this now. I was putting some herbs into the magic butter machine. You can do like a minimum of 500 milliliters. That's the least amount of oil that you can put in this thing. So I'm doing 50 grams of henbane leaves. You can use the seeds. So with henbane, if you're going to use the seeds in an ointment or an infused oil, you would definitely want to crush them first. So like taking a mortar and pestle, molcajete, really pounding them down. You could do the alcohol intermediary method to help soften them up. One thing that you'll find referred to in a lot of the mentions of henbane as a ritual fumigation, or even like going back into more ancient world types of things, and they used to do this with cannabis seeds too, is that they would be roasted beforehand. So this is just like a really old kind of precursor to decarbing things. So in the same way that you would decarb your cannabis before you make it into edibles, you can decarb your henbane seeds before you add them to incense or to ointments. So all that means is that you're going to take those crushed up henbane seeds, spread them out on a baking sheet, and then you'll put them in the oven. It's generally around 225 degrees for no more than like 30 minutes. These are just like all extra tweaks and hacks. Like you guys totally don't have to do that, but it is a thing, and you can do it. And for a while, I was roasting all the henbane seeds before I'd put them in my incenses and things. Kind of brings out like some of those volatile oils and stuff like that. Henbane, where'd she go? That's just citric acid. Okay, one more secret. One thing that is often used in medicinal salves to help with the penetration of the medicinal components, to help with the absorption of the salves, is something that's called MSM. So this is an organic sulfur kind of compound. And you get mixed, not mixed reviews, mixed, different sources are saying different things where MSM is not absorbable through the skin, MSM is absorbable through the skin, or you have to do this to it first. And so you want to keep the percentage of this relatively low. So try and keep like below, 5% of your overall formulation. So just a little sprinkle. And that is just a little white granule. People will take this internally as a dietary supplement. It's supposed to be good for a lot of different things, but just a little sprinkle, and it comes with these little scoops here too. So I'm not super like accurate on how much I add or whatever. But it's not going to dissolve by itself. And that's the key with it. Just putting it in there, it's going to stay like those little granules. So what you want to do is add some aloe. You could do this like at the end too, before you do your wax, if you wanted to. I'm just gonna put it all in right now. Still cannot believe that I actually caught my kitchen on fire. Pop that in there. So there are all different sorts of things that we can add to salves to make them work a little bit better. The MSM is one thing. You can even just like splash a little bit of Everclear or rubbing alcohol into your salve, essentially like making kind of a liniment. So liniments are how belladonna typically would have been used and applied up until like the 19th century for pain and muscle spasms and things like that. The reason that belladonna was so popularly sold as a liniment and not just a regular salve is because like the addition of having that alcohol in there is really what makes it so that the medicinal components can be absorbed. And that's one of the reasons why they discontinued the belladonna plasters, was because people were putting them on and overdosing and hallucinating or having these uncomfortable side effects. So the alcohol addition really helps with that. It makes your consistency a little bit weird. So it's not as solid as it would have been without the alcohol. But you can really add as much as you want to. I would say up to like half and half before you really start like messing with your concentration when it comes to making a liniment. So the other option, like I mentioned earlier, if you are wanting to do a liniment, would be to make an infused oil at 1 to 10, make an infused or a tincture at 1 to 10, and then just like combine the two together. That way you're getting oil that has plant material in it and alcohol that has plant material in it. So you're not diluting anything. Okay. I do have one ointment that's a little bit newer. It is a wolfsbane ointment or aconite. Um, I haven't really talked a whole lot about that one. It is one of the traditional flying ointment ingredients. Wolfsbane typically being associated with shape shifting, said to give the sensation of having hair or feathers or moving through the air. It's also used topically for pain relief. Wolfsbane is extremely poisonous. It should never be ingested. It loses a lot of its toxicity when the plant material is dried. But wolfsbane is used in traditional Chinese medicine. It is used as the root. This is called Fuji, Fuzhi. So in Chinese medicine, there is a practice that is called Paozhe, which is the specific preparation of whatever medicine is that you're making, preparing the plant material in a specific way to enhance its medicinal efficacy or to mitigate any unwanted side effects or potential toxicity. So it could be a specific way of slicing the roots or a specific way of storing the plant material or soaking it in salt water, stir frying. There's a lot of different tweaks that Paozhe uses to enhance the plant material. And that is what's happened with the wolfsbane root here. It's been soaked in brine and boiled and sliced into these little pieces. And then this is what's actually used in the medicine. But even after that process, anytime this is given internally, it's supposed to be, you do an entire decoction and then get rid of that. And then do another decoction, and then that's what gets administered medicinally. But this is not for internal consumption. I'm not telling you to do that. I use these for the topical application. But they are very hard. They're almost like they've been candied or something. So to just like throw these in the oil, it's not going to work as well. So what I do with them is I kind of came up with my own little thing, is basically like I just simmer them in alcohol for a little bit. I'm not going to put them in there. Yep. Just wetting them with alcohol and then simmering them to soften and heat them up. Again, do this in something that is reserved just for poisonous plants. Yeah, but then once it's done, once I've done the little simmer alcohol intermediary, then I just add it to my oil like normal, and it gets infused on heat. And I also do the 1 to 10 with these guys. And that is another thing too that I'll mention, like for years it was kind of like made out like these plants were super hard to get a hold of and they're so secretive and so hard to find, and like that's kind of the case, but it's also kind of been kept that way. So you can totally find a lot of poisonous plants if you look around on the internet. eBay is a really good place to find a lot of things. I wouldn't recommend getting mandrake on eBay because it's usually ginger. I wouldn't recommend getting mandrake anywhere from like the ground that you grew it in because it's probably just not it unless you know somebody that grows it. A lot of traditional Chinese medicine suppliers, if you go through like the actual supplier, like they generally want to see some kind of like, they want to know that you're an herbalist. So like there's an herb school here in Florida, and they have a lot of these low dose herbs that they use for all sorts of different treatment things. But they won't just like let you walk in off of the street and be like, hey, can I get some of that wolfsbane root? They will not do that. but you can find them on eBay. It's generally, you're not going to find it looking for wolfsbane, aconite, monk's hood, or anything like that. You're going to find it under the Chinese pinyin name for it, which I just put in there. So you'll find the wolfsbane root pieces, radix, conatai. Another one, henbane, especially the seeds, is used in Ayurvedic medicine. I'm starting to see more henbane seeds kind of becoming regularly available. But if you do like an eBay search or Google search, honestly, just do eBay, put in the henbane and the Ayurvedic mention. There is I don't know, Sanskrit or traditional name for henbane, but I don't know what it is. And if you looked through that, you would definitely find it. But those are available. And then belladonna. Belladonna, the most popular place that is grown for the pharmaceutical industry around the world is in Bulgaria. So you can generally find a lot of poisonous plants coming out of Bulgaria. Again, so just some keywords there. It's really all about the keywords. All right, so we've done our infused oil. Now we need to make it into an ointment. So the beakers are nice to use, but you can also use mason jars. That's typically what I use for infusing my ointments or adding the wax to them. They generally got markings on the sides, but I've kind of figured out, I just eyeball it at this point. So again, we're working with our 250 milliliters. The amount of wax that I add for 250 milliliters is 4 tablespoons. So that could be carnauba wax, which is vegan. It could be beeswax, any of those waxes. Yeah, strictly medicinal is awesome for seeds. There's another one in Ohio that's called Companion Plants, and you can actually get a lot of baby plant cuttings from there, which is nice for things like foxglove and hellebore and wolfsbane and belladonna and stuff that's just such a hassle to get to grow from seeds. Like, the point is to work with the plants, to connect with them, to learn from them, to really get into it. And it's discouraging if you can't even get your seed to start. So it's okay to buy baby plants. So yes, 4 tablespoons of wax added to the oil. And like, you could totally cut this recipe down if you wanted to, just keep all of the ratios the same. This seems to be a good amount, so it's not too runny, it's not too solid. And then same thing with this one, it's gonna get put in the double boiler on the saucepan. I always do the wax on the stove because like you really can't get a slow cooker hot enough to melt the wax. So that I always do on the stove. You want to keep stirring it because as the wax melts, it's gonna kind of like creep up the outside of the bottle. So you just want to make sure you get everything, that way all those little pieces get broken down. That melts. Another thing that I will add that Sometimes I add it right now while it's on and the wax is melting. Sometimes I just put it in at the end. But I think that adding it while it's still on the heat is helpful, just to help like marry everything together. I don't use this in every formula, but I do use it in my Ungüentum venenum, which is like my most traditional medieval recipe flying ointment. And what I use is wood ashes. It's almost empty. So it's just a black powder. So this is horticultural wood ash. It is the ash of hardwood, essentially, that has been burned. You can get a big bag of it. This is where the sodium hydroxide mention is going to come in. So it's literally like little pieces of charcoal. So that just gets powdered in a mortar and pestle, and then you just add a little bit. I try not to add very much. The reason for that is because wood ashes, when you mix them with water, creates lye or sodium hydroxide, which is used in soap making, which is great, but it's also very caustic to the skin. So it can essentially burn you. So just kind of being mindful of that. That's not what's happening with the flying ointment. That's a separate process, but just making sure like I'm not putting like copious amounts of this in. I usually do like probably a half a teaspoon for every 250 milliliter batch. So what that does is it raises the pH of the ointment. So lowering the pH and making it acidic helps to extract and pull out the chemical constituents of the plant material. Raising the pH and making it more alkaline helps with the absorption into the skin. So like I mentioned with the pH scale earlier, our skin is naturally acidic. So if we put more acid on it, it's going to close down the pores. It's going to help seal everything in there. So we want something that is the opposite of that, to open the pores and to help push that stuff inside. And that's what the higher pH is going to do. It's going to open up the pores, open up the cuticle, and get everything in there. I've not ever accidentally made soap. That's a really good question. Activated charcoal will not work. Don't use activated charcoal because it's a totally different creature. Activated charcoal is something good to have around in case you poison yourself, because you can mix it with some water and drink it, and it's going to absorb all of the toxins in your stomach. But we don't want that for the ointments. It's also not got it doesn't have the same chemical composition, so we're not getting the alkalinity that we need using activated charcoal. But that was totally like the first thing that I used, because I was like, oh, where am I going to get wood ashes? That's not readily available, but activated charcoal is. And it turns out the wood ashes are a lot easier to find. The reason that I even came upon that realization was I was reading an article in the Journal of Anesthesiology that was talking about old types of anesthesia or surgery, different things like that the nightshades are very much a part of in history. And they mentioned the soot that is commonly spoken of being put in medieval witches' ointments, that they would add this soot to it so that they could see where they're putting the ointment and see how much they're putting on and all this silliness. But in actuality, it's because the soot or the ashes raised the pH and it helped for the absorption. Yep, if you have a fireplace, you could just collect from there. Yeah, it's essentially soot, or if you've ever made like lamp black ink, kind of that same idea. Yeah, absolutely. I would use a coffee grinder to pulverize the raw herb over a mortar and pestle. The mortar and pestle looks cool and it's great, but it's not that good for like getting things really ground down to powder. Um, but I also usually don't worry about that either. Like when I make my belladonna ointment, I'll normally keep like some of the pieces, the stems and stuff the same size. I mean, it's not all really large size. There's like the leaves have been powdered in that, so there's still like some larger pieces in there. But between what I do with like the alcohol and the acid and everything else, I think it winds up coming out okay. But yeah, totally use a coffee grinder. Use all of the modern things to make your life easier. Okay. Yeah, so the wax, when it starts to melt, it does kind of like a lava lamp sort of thing, where it starts to like trickle back up. And I just want to like knock all of that down and stir it around just so it all becomes liquid. Because we want all of that wax to be evenly distributed throughout the oil. So after that's melted, the ointment is pretty much ready to pour into a tin. The only other thing would be to add like any other extra essential oils or things like that that you're wanting to. I do add essential oils to, I think, all of my flying ointment formulas. There's a couple different reasons for that. The first reason is that the essential oils themselves actually help with the absorption, because essential oils are very volatile. They evaporate very easily. They almost behave like an alcohol. So like you can put on an essential oil on your skin and a few minutes later, it's going to be gone. It's going to be completely absorbed. So kind of getting that benefit, helping with the absorption, helping to pull some of those tropane alkaloids in with them. That's sort of one of my theories. But the properties of the essential oils can also act synergistically. So there are certain essential oils that we would consider entheogenic, but aren't necessarily psychoactive or poisonous, unless we use like a really extremely large dose. But when we combine them with more potent plant allies like the nightshades, or even working with psychedelic mushrooms and things like that, and various other plant medicine ceremonies, kind of incorporating those essential oils and the different chemical compounds that are in there can really give like a little bit of a different direction or add different layers to whatever it is you're making a formula for, or really just kind of like synergize everything all together. One of my favorite essential oils to use that I put in the Inventum Venenum is clary sage oil. Clary sage, or Salvia sclarea. This has a lot of its own associations when it comes to intuition and psychic ability and second sight, things like that, and does have some minor entheogenic effects. So used in synergy with the nightshades, it really enhances kind of the light perception, the little sparks, the shadows, different things like that that are really characteristic of visionary experiences on a nightshade. Of course, classic mugwort and wormwood. I use these in a lot of my ointments as well. Mugwort being the plant for dreaming and intuition. that more lunar energy to it. Of course, is going to be an obvious combination. The wormwood I really like. I think wormwood is a little bit more, I don't think it's obviously a little bit more fiery and masculine and in your face, I think, than mugwort is. So as an addition, the wormwood essential oil is really awesome. And I always try and find like the wormwood oil that's actually green, because you can get some that is not. It's just like a clear, I don't know if it's fragrance oil or like maybe not as good of a product. But I like the dark wormwood oil. Another one is valerian. Valerian is a good addition. We have valerian being mentioned in some contexts with medieval flying ointments as well, and just kind of witchcraft in general. That can be helpful sort of for relaxation and grounding, things like that, to kind of tame down some of the more effects of the tropane alkaloids. But you can essentially add any essential oils that you really want to, just seem to be helpful. And I don't have like specific amounts on those. I'm pretty generous with the essential oils, because that's part of the reason that I'm adding them, is for their different entheogenic effects or medicinal constituents. You just want to make sure that you add the essential oils after you remove it from the heat. So if you do it while this is still on the stove and it's still boiling and still melting, you're going to lose a lot of your essential oils. So I'll put them in after I've taken that off the heat, right before I pour them. And then usually like right after I pour them, I'll take the little lid and put it on top of the tin. I don't close it all the way, because if you do that, it tends to like ooze back out, because of the heat. So if I just kind of like barely set it on top there, it solidifies, but I'm not getting all of the evaporation on the essential oils. Let me get finished later. Does anybody have any questions about the extraction or any of the stuff that I just talked about as far as making the ointments or making the oils? Like the flying ointments are super popular and they're very nostalgic and very much associated with like that medieval witchcraft archetype. But I personally prefer the oils. Because I use literally the same formula for my infused oil that I do for my ointments. And I do sell them separately. It's literally just a different consistency. So yeah, it's really kind of up to you, like how you want to apply them and work with them. But that witch's salve is very much, part of kind of why we're doing this and tapping into that current of medieval European witchcraft. So applying the ointment, generally it's done in some kind of a ritual setting with some kind of predetermined intention. So if we're just literally applying the ointment, not doing anything else, solely to see what the ointment makes us feel like, we're probably not going to have that much of an experience. But if we are incorporating it into existing ritual structure, existing tools that we're using to get into a ritual context, combining with incantation and spell work and all of these different layers of things, they can really enhance and have everything working together and being more effective. So it's not so much, it's not like, taking a hit of acid or smoking cannabis and like, you know, right then and there, like something is different. These are a little bit slower to come on. They're a little bit more subtle, a little bit more Saturnian maybe. You know, so not expecting like these really, really intense states. With the 1 to 10 formulation, if you have a 1 ounce tin, there's not going to be any more than 3 grams of plant material in every single one. The reason that I did that is because 3 grams is generally the tipping point where we go from uncomfortable side effects to now we're moving into more of like the lethal domain. And that's strictly like actually ingesting and eating this. So like with the thought in mind that like somebody's kid or somebody's cat could come along and literally like scoop this whole thing out and just eat it. And they're not going to get any more than 3 grams of plant material diluted with the other ingredients and things like that. So that was kind of a fail safe. You can definitely make them stronger. You can make them weaker. These are some of the most powerful and magical plants that have ever existed. So to think that their efficacy is strictly constrained to chemical constituents is really like doing a disservice to the plant spirits and to all of the people that have worked with them prior to us. You know, these plants retain the memory of how they've been used, when they've been used, how they've been perceived. You know, all of that is part of the plant's spirit and personality, just like all of our life experiences. You know, even though it's not necessarily things that we did or initiated, they become part of us, part of who we are, and carry us forward. And it is the same with these plants. Yes, you just rub the oils on your body. How does the fatty acid content compare between olive oil and grapeseed oil? I have looked into that a little bit. So olive oil, unprocessed, is going to have high fatty acid content, triglycerides. I want to say there is a similarity between the olive oil and the grapeseed oil. I almost feel like it has more to do with the grapes. So I couldn't give you like a straight answer on that, but there's something with the grapes and the winemaking and the extraction, but I can't remember what it is. So I'm just gonna sound silly if I keep talking about it. But both seem to work pretty effectively. So as far as applying them, where you apply them and how you apply them is going to kind of determine how they work and how you experience them. So like today, I went to the chiropractor and I haven't been there in a while. It was a bad experience and they're just not very good at doing what they're supposed to do anymore. But I went in today and was going to try and get aligned before this class. And of course, the person was not able to do what the other person was doing months prior. So I left. Then I got home. I'm like, wait, I've got like this whole like artillery of pain relieving salves just like sitting around here and I'm not using any of them. So I put one on and I was reminded like how quickly they actually work. And it's such a weird thing, you know, just putting something on and it literally just like working. You just don't normally expect that. Like things don't usually work that well, but these do. Where I was going with that, but yeah, pain relief. So that was awesome. So I put some on earlier. I've gone throughout my entire day. Like I didn't put a whole lot on. Definitely maybe more grounded and relaxed than I normally am before doing these things, but not any like huge perceptual changes. So the most like innocuous method of application would be using it as an anointing oil. So for its spiritual occult correspondences and different properties like that. So when we're working with the plant in that way, literally any amount is going to give you the magical, the esoteric, the occult virtues that the plant has. So that could be something as simple as like anointing your wrists, your temples, your third eye, like the back base of your skull is another good spot. That's nice for like meditation, or if you have a divination practice and kind of getting into that intuitive mindset, just really kind of like loosening up and relaxing. That is an easy way to do that, just applying in those areas. The more traditional, more intense would be going for areas that are a little bit more absorptive. So the main places would be your underarms, the soles of your feet. I've done it before where I'll apply the ointment to the soles of my feet, my underarms, neck, things like that. And then I put my socks back on just to kind of help like hold everything in there, because your feet are super absorptive, your underarms are super absorptive. That's really, really nice for like really sinking in, really heavy grounding, like sedating. Could be sleep. It could be for chthonic journeying, going to the underworld, any various different things like that. But it is much more of like going within than what I would term as like an astral projection, or spirit flight, where you're going like up and out to this place. For me, with the nightshades, with the flying ointments, yes, it is spirit flight, but it's something that happens in a more inward direction. And that seems to be more characteristic of the nightshades, because they are Saturnian, being associated with restriction and boundaries, and really concentrating and drawing things in, is that Saturnian energy. So for me, they're more chthonic, they're more oriented towards working with nature spirits, earthbound spirits, ancestral spirits, any of us that are still down here hanging out, where we get into things like LSD, ayahuasca, DMT, some of the more psychedelic things, that it becomes a little bit more celestial. It becomes more about like interdimensional travel and celestial beings and things like that, where my realm of interest, my realm of exploration is more in the spirits of the earth, the underworld spirits, nature spirits, and that. Nightshades are helpful for that for me. They'll be different for everybody, just like everything else is. But just sharing my experience. So underarms, soles of the feet, that's great. The next one up from there would literally just be like your entire body. The only areas that you would want to kind of avoid or be very, very cautious with would be like putting it on your lips. I don't know if anybody's seen the TV show Salem, which is one of my favorite witchy TV shows, movies of all time. But they use a flying ointment, and they always like rub it on each other's lips. I've had a couple customers that have told me that they've actually used my Datura ointment that way, and it was very effective. So I thought that was kind of some awesome feedback. But again, these are going to be absorbed much more easily in those areas, including like your genitals, your butthole, the inside of your nose, any entryway into your body. Just extreme caution. But with like a lot of things, we're told to fear, or we're told not to do something, there's usually like a deeper layer there. And part of my work is the use of psychoactive aphrodisiacs for healing trauma and body positivity and sex positivity and all of that. And that's like a whole separate other class. But it is possible to kind of negotiate that rule a little bit. But just being careful if you do put it on any of those areas, know that it's going to be much more effective. But I will show you how I would do it. I generally always suggest everybody start with the patch test. A patch test is literally to determine if you have any allergies or sensitivity. So you're basically just take the ointment, rub finger on it just a little bit, like it's just enough to get it wet. I know there's a light behind me, but it's not hardly anything on there. And you would do that on the inside of your elbow, do it on your wrist, you could do it behind your ear. If it's the first time you've ever worked with the nightshade or a flying ointment, that might be a good idea to do just to make sure that you don't have an allergic reaction or get like a weird rash or anything like that, because it can happen with anything. So that would be the patch test. The next, I generally suggest like lowest starting dose. I call it 1/4 teaspoon. But it's essentially, you just kind of like daub your finger in there. It's literally just like, there we go. Whatever you can get to sit on your fingertip. That's like a good starting amount. So another thing that AC mentioned in a lot of the medieval accounts is that before applying the ointments, the women would rub their skin to make it ruddy. So essentially you're just like rubbing, feeling like that heat and that friction until your skin starts to turn red. That's bringing all of the blood to the surface. And then when you put the ointment in that area, the blood's going to help to pull it all a little bit deeper. So really just aggressively rubbing those areas beforehand and then applying the ointment over that. And with these two, like the first time I ever tried one, it was very much like, you know, just dab a little bit, and that was fine. And there's really like a subconscious thing that happens the first time you come into contact with the plants that you know is poisonous, or you've been told is poisonous, or is just common knowledge that this is a poisonous plant. There's like a little part of your brain that it just doesn't want to do it. And it's like, no. And then when you finally do it and come into contact with that poisonous plant, it's like something shifts, something changes. You've sort of crossed a threshold. So you now have a new understanding. You have a firsthand physical experience of what this plant is capable of. And that's really a big part of the poison path, and coming to understand these different plants is, you know, we each have like these individual stepping stones or thresholds that we cross as we kind of work our way up our poison path journey. And, you know, each one of those is going to be different for everybody. And everybody kind of starts at a little bit different of a place, but it's going to breaking through those. That's really okay. Full teaspoon. Yeah, that's a full teaspoon. Oh, what I was going to mention, telling the story about just applying like a tiny little bit. So if you take an entire teaspoon out and you just put it like right here or just on the back of your neck's going to feel great, but you're not going to get as much absorption as you would if you covered your entire body with it. So that is the thing with the flying ointment, that really makes the difference is the larger the surface area that you apply it to, the more your body is going to absorb. So each little square inch of skin is only going to absorb a certain amount of whatever is applied to it, and then it's just not going to take anymore. So if we spread it around, like we're literally absorbing everywhere. These are really good for scrying. I think that's kind of the best thing for flying ointments or for nightshades in particular, just because of the influence that they have on our perception of light and dark. And any kind of practice that draws on the abstract and subconscious mind to start kind of making sense and making shapes and forms out of shadows, or maybe it's just a dark room. If you stare into the darkness long enough, like you're eventually going to start seeing some different light things happening that may or may not actually be there. And even like the subtlest amount of light, like the tiniest candle that's like hidden in the corner of a room, like it throws enough shadow and gives you enough light that you can make out like the difference between things, but you're not really seeing. And it's sort of in that place where like the most visionary experiences come through with the nightshades. I remember one time, I think it was the first time I made my Unguentum Venenum, and I put it on. I wasn't smoking cannabis regularly at the time, so that definitely helps too, because I do not remember dreams when I am. But at this time I wasn't, and I put the ointment on, and I remember just going to bed, which like I normally will. I'll just kind of lay there and see like what comes through, and that's generally when it all happens. It's sort of after the ritual, after you've done all of the things, and kind of lay back down, and then that's when the voices and the visitations and things start to happen. And remember waking up sort of in like this half sleep, and I don't know if it was like an older version of myself that I was seeing, or of a spirit or something, but I opened my eyes and it was just like a flash, but it was like the most intense flash, and I could like audibly hear this man like make sort of a surprised like grunting noise. Like, oh, when I saw him, but when I saw him, I was laying in bed, laying on my back in a dark room, and I just sort of like jumped and woke up, and I see like this face, body, like everything, like he's just like hovering like inches in front of my face, and I'm getting like goosebumps talking about it. Just hovering there, and within like a half a second of me realizing that he was there, just sort of like disappeared. So that was a really weird kind of experience. Another thing that's like super, yeah, they get surprised when they realize you can see them. Another really like intense experience would have been Samhain 2017. I did just post about this. I wrote an article about it. Definitely don't condone anyone try this at home, but I did some belladonna tea with some henbane, and I was having full-on auditory hallucinations where I was having a conversation with people and beings that were not there. And I was also seeing shadow people and demonic sort of faces that would. I was out walking around, it was nighttime, it was like 5 o'clock in the morning, and this lady's out like walking her dogs, and I remember like sort of just glancing up at her, and I was tripping my balls off, and I probably looked scarier to her than she did to me, but in sort of like that dim pre-dawn light, like the whole face just turned into to something else. So that was super duper intense. But the main thing that I noticed was the shadow people. Lots and lots and lots and lots of shadow people. So very interesting. But belladonna is my favorite. It's the one that I work with the most, the one that I'm most connected to. So you always hear kind of the reference to it being used as a Renaissance beauty product to dilate the pupils, to make people look more desirable, more receptive. It definitely does that. It is also used in ophthalmology to dilate the pupils. This kind of correlates to second sight and perception of spirits and kind of changing your vision so that it is no longer like regular everyday vision. And that's something that belladonna is very adept at. All of the nightshades, have that mydriatic effect, but it's really like belladonna that's known for the dilated pupils and the big black berries, which are essentially like little scrying mirrors. So belladonna is one of my favorites for spirit perception, communication, and that. I am even telling you guys all this stuff, but not sure how deep into this you are, but one thing that you can do that's kind of a sort of like a second sight initiatory thing, or to kind of pull off the cobwebs to start opening you up to receiving some of that information that way, or prior to scrying. What you can do is apply the belladonna ointment and then taking just a little bit of it, not in your eyeballs, but on your eyelids. So you're getting just a little bit of absorption. And I just kind of like whatever residual was on my hands, like putting it up there. Depending on how much you put on, depending on how strong it is, your vision might get a little bit blurry. It will come back. This is all hypothetical for entertainment purposes only, but I told you this was the no bullshit flying ointment class. So that is one way that they can be worked with. If you get it in your eye, you'll probably have like one big pupil and one small pupil and not be able to see for a couple days, but all right. Any questions? Can you apply too much? I don't personally believe that it is possible to die using a flying ointment. So if death is too much, then no, I do not think that you could. Could you apply too much and have an uncomfortable experience where, maybe you're experiencing like dry mouth, maybe you're having troubles urinating, or maybe like your vision's blurry, any of like the characteristic side effects of tropane alkaloid poisoning. They're uncomfortable, they're annoying. At their worst, they can land you in the hospital, but really like there's little to no risk of actually killing yourself, especially with a flying ointment. The amount that you would have to apply and the concentration, and then you would have to like avoid seeking any kind of like medical care. That may like eventually kill you. And that's the thing, like with a lot of poisonous plants, a lot of nightshades, I should say. They can lead to death when ingested, but it's really people that are being very, very reckless, like teenagers that I ate an entire pod of datura seeds so I could trip, sort of thing. That's like the most severe cases, but like even with that, with modern medicine, we're generally able to keep people alive long enough for the poisoning to wear off. There's not really antidotes or treatment per se, but just sort of like supportive care to get people through, the toxicity of it. So I would say, yeah, you could definitely have an uncomfortable experience, but it's not going to be any more uncomfortable than like a really bad acid trip or, something like that. So I think when you're messing around with things like this and experimenting, that, sort of sense of fear, trepidation, potential risk is definitely there. But it's also, I think, part of the reason why we are all here. And for me, it's been, just sort of an experimental thing, no different from experimenting like with all of the things that I did in high school, all of the drugs and psychedelics and a few that I've kept with me. It is, you're putting yourself at risk. You're trying something that you've never tried before. There's a potential that it could go completely wrong. But really, like in all actuality, like the ointments, the salves, the topical application is pretty foolproof. I probably would have poisoned myself by now. Yay, thank you. Thank you for coming. It was good to see you. If anybody has any questions, and again, I'm happy to answer any questions at the end of all this because it's really like a really, really big, broad topic that I'm trying to cram into a couple of hours, and all of the information wants to bubble out at once. So before I forget, I'll be sending out samples of the ointment that I create. You're not gonna have them by Halloween. I just have too much going on. I would love to be able to make that happen, but I don't think I'm gonna be able to. So I will get them to you as soon as humanly possible. And I appreciate your patience. Yes, I'm glad you enjoyed that too. I'm all greasy. But yeah, you can totally do like your chest, your underarms, like that whole area. I've never really worried about like putting it over the heart or anything like that. I don't think that's ever been an issue. But I am starting to get the sweats. I'd mentioned, I think, doing like a group reading while I was on this flying ointment journey, and I think that's just going to be too much. I don't know how I can do a group reading for 40 some people. I will be sending out the recording. I'm going to go back through all of you guys that ordered on the website. I'll go back through just to make sure that I don't miss anybody. I'll send out the email for the recording. And I believe I have everybody's address for everyone that ordered through the website and Patreon people. I'll just talk to you guys later. Oh. I was going to do one thing. It's just an oracle deck. Yay, I'm glad you learned a lot. It's hard to gauge, like, with this being a more intermediate class, like, I don't want to spend a whole lot of time talking about like the history and, this is Datura, this is Henbane, this is Belladonna, because I feel like we all kind of know that, but I want to make sure that people do like learn things. This is the Devil's Deck by Shiva Honey. It's a really pretty oracle deck that's kind of, it's based on different satanic rituals. So the card that we get tonight is bind, cut, and banish. So we see a dagger cutting a cord, cutting the attachments, because the attachments that we have are also what keep us attached to our ego. So we've got all of these contracts, all of these relationships with the different people in our lives, different forces that we have come into contact with. And that's how we form our idea of ourselves. So it asks, what situations are holding you down? Which relationships are stealing your air? Take an inventory of all that restricts you. Are you willing to free yourself? Can you move past the trauma that has bound you? Find the courage to examine your discomfort and make a commitment to liberation. Ta-da. And it's very much about like examining that discomfort and living in the discomfort and really just like settling into those situations or ideas or emotions that make you uncomfortable. Because there's a reason that there's tension there. Like same thing with this anxiety that is just ridiculous. Like I wrote a book about poisonous plants. I've taught this class a million times, but literally like I've been running around for like 2-3 hours before this, just like ready to throw up because I have so many things that I want to say. And can't get them all out fast enough. And then I forget what I'm talking about. And then I get upset because I forgot something. But if I just sit in the anxiety and like feel it, and just like recognize it for everything that it is and like a physical emotion, then it almost like becomes grounding. And it's like I sort of sink through the anxiety. And then it's there, but then you don't notice it, and then it just goes away. And with that, I will leave you guys my ramblings. So have a great night. Happy Halloween. Let me know if you guys need anything. I'm happy to help you with any of your poison plant pursuits. Just reading some questions and